Treggis felt considerably relieved when the owner of the bookstore went front to wait upon another customer. After all, it was essentially nerve-wracking to have a stooped, bespectacled, fawning old man constantly at one's shoulder, peering at the page one was glancing at, pointing here and there with a gnarled, dirty finger, obsequiously wiping dust from the shelves with a tobacco-stained handkerchief, to say nothing of the exquisite boredom of listening to the fellow's cackling, high-pitched reminiscences. Undoubtedly he meant well, but really, there was a limit. One couldn't do much more than smile politely and hope that the little bell over the front of the store would tinkle, as it had. Treggis moved toward the back of the store, hoping the disgusting little man wouldn't try to search him out. He passed 100 Greek titles, then the popular sciences section. Next, in a strange jumble of titles and authors, he passed Edgar Rice Burroughs, Anthony Trollope, Theosophy, and the poems of Longfellow. The farther back he went, the deeper the dust became, the fewer the naked light bulbs suspended above the corridor, the higher the piles of mouldy, dog-eared books. It was really a splendid old place, and for the life of him Treggis couldn't understand how he had missed it before. Bookstores were his sole pleasure in life. He spent all his free hours in them, wandering happily through the stacks. Of course, he was just interested in certain types of books. At the end of the high ramp of books there were 3 more corridors, branching off at absurd angles. Treggis followed the centre path, reflecting that the bookstore hadn't seemed so large from the outside, just a door half hidden between 2 buildings, with an old hand-lettered sign in its upper panel. But then these old stores were deceptive, often extending to nearly half a block in depth. At the end of this corridor 2 more book trails split off. Choosing the one on the left, Treggis started reading titles, casually scanning them up and down with a practised glance. He was in no hurry. He could, if he wished, spend the rest of the day here, to say nothing of the night. He had shuffled 8 or 10 feet down the corridor before one title struck him. He went back to it. It was a small, black-covered book, old, but with that ageless look that some books have. Its edges were worn, and the print on the cover was faded. "Well, what do you know?" Treggis murmured softly. The cover read, "Care and Feeding of the Griffin," and beneath that, in smaller print, "Advice to the Keeper." A griffin, he knew, was a mythological monster, half lion and half eagle. "Well now," Treggis said to himself, "let's see now." He opened the book and began reading the table of contents. The headings went: 1. Species of griffin. 2. A short history of griffinology. 3. Subspecies of griffin. 4. Food for the griffin. 5. Constructing a natural habitat for the griffin. 6. The griffin during molting season. 7. The griffin and... He closed the book. This, he told himself, is decidedly, well, unusual. He flipped through the book, reading a sentence here and there. His first thought was that the book was one of the unnatural natural history compilations so dear to the Elizabethan heart was clearly wrong. The book wasn't old enough, and there was nothing euphuistic in the writing, no balanced sentence structure, ingenious antithesis, and the like. It was straightforward, clean-cut, concise. Treggis flipped through a few more pages and came upon this. The sole diet of the griffin is young virgins. Feeding time is once a month, and care should be exercised. He closed the book again. The sentence set up a train of thought all its own. He banished it with a blush and looked again at the shelf, hoping to find more books of the same type. Something like A Short History of the Affairs of the Sirens, or perhaps The Proper Breeding of Minotaurs. But there was nothing even remotely like it, not on that shelf nor any other, as far as he could tell. "Find anything?" a voice at his shoulder asked. Tregus gulped, smiled, and held out the black-covered book. "Yes," the old man said, wiping dust from the cover. "Quite a rare book, this." "Oh, is it?" murmured Tregus. "Griffins," the old man mused, flipping through the book, "are quite rare. Quite a rare species of animal," he finished after a moment's thought. $1.50 for this book, sir?" Tregus left with his possession clutched under his thin right arm. He made straight for his room. It wasn't every day that one brought a book on the care and feeding of griffins. Tregus's room bore a striking resemblance to a second-hand bookstore. There was the same lack of space, the same film of grey dust over everything, the same vaguely arranged chaos of titles, authors, and types. Tregus didn't stop to gloat over his treasures. His faded, libidinous verses passed unnoticed. Quite unceremoniously he pushed the Psychopathia Sexualis from his armchair, sat down, and began to read. There was quite a lot to the care and feeding of the griffin. One wouldn't think that a creature half lion and half eagle would be so touchy. There was also an interesting application of the eating habits of the griffin, and other information. For pure enjoyment, the Griffin book was easily as good as the Havelock Ellis lectures on sex, formerly his favourite. Toward the end, there were full instructions on how to get to the zoo. The instructions were, to say the least, unique. It was a good ways past midnight when Tregus closed the book. What a deal of strange information there was between these two black covers. One sentence in particular he couldn't get out of his head. The sole diet of the griffin is young virgins. That bothered him. It didn't seem fair, somehow. After a while he opened the book again to the instructions for getting to the zoo. Decidedly strange they were, and yet not too difficult, not requiring certainly too much physical exertion, just a few words, a few motions. Tregus realized suddenly how onerous his bank clerk's job was, a stupid waste of 8 good hours a day, no matter how one looked at it. How much more interesting to be a keeper in charge of the griffin, to use the special ointments during molting season, to answer questions about griffinology, to be in charge of feeding, the sole diet. Yes, Tregus mumbled rapidly, pacing the floor of his narrow room. A hoax, but might as well try out the instructions. For a laugh. He laughed hollowly. There was no blinding flash, no clap of thunder, but Tregus was nevertheless transported, instantaneously so it seemed, to a place. He staggered for a moment, then regained his balance and opened his eyes. The sunlight was blinding. Looking around, he could see that someone had done a very good job of constructing the natural habitat of the griffin. Tregus walked forward, holding himself quite well considering the trembling in his ankles, knees, and stomach. Then he saw the griffin. At the same time, the griffin saw him. Slowly at first, with ever-gaining momentum, the griffin advanced on him. The great eagle's wings opened. The talons extended and the griffin leaped or sailed forward. Tregus tried to jump out of the way in a single uncontrollable shudder. The griffin came at him, huge and golden in the sun. And Tregus screamed desperately, "No, no! The sole diet of the griffin is young." Then he screamed again in full realization as the talons seized him.